In this video, we'll be using fur yarn, and this is actually made up of 3 strands, and we'll be taking these strands apart. But if you don't have this type of fur, just use whatever you have, as long as it's not too thick. We also have our silver sparkle cord, our white cord, and 1.5 millimeters. We also have fiber fill, stitch markers, a darning needle, a pair of scissors, and we have a crochet hook in 4 millimeters and 3.5 millimeters. The stitches in this video include the single crochet, double crochet, triple crochet, increase, decrease, chain stitch, and slip stitch. For the hands and arms, we're going to start with a magic circle. This is going to be the hand. And inside the magic circle, we're going to do 6 single crochets. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then we're going to pull the tail to bring the stitches in a circle. For row number 2, we're going to do an increase all the way around, so 6 increases. We're going to start with our first single crochet, and we're going to put a stitch marker. Here's our stitch marker. And then we're going to do another single crochet in the same stitch for an increase. And then we're going to continue to do the increases all the way around. There's our second increase, our third, our fourth, our fifth, and our sixth increase. And we should have 12 single crochets. Let's tighten up our circle. And for row number 3, we're going to do 12 single crochets all the way around. There's 1. Let's get our stitch marker. Two, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and number 12. Then we're going to flip our work over, and this completes the hand. For row number 4, we're going to do a color change into our silver sparkle. So we're going to start with our first crochet. We're going to yarn over, pull through, and then we're going to get our silver yarn and pull through the 2 loops. And then we'll be working with the silver yarn, and we'll go into our next stitch. and make our first single crochet. And we can put a stitch marker on that one. And since we won't be using the white anymore, we can cut that off. And we can also make this tail of the white shorter. So then we're just going to do a total of 12 single crochets all the way around. So this is our first, our second, our third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth. Here's number 10. Number 11. And here is number 12. And we're ready to move on to our next rows. For rows 5, 6, 7, 8, we're going to do 12 single crochets all the way around. So we're going to do our first single crochet, put in our stitch marker, we're going to leave our stitch marker, and when we have 4 stitch markers, that means we're done with our 4 rows, and we'll continue with our next row. So we'll meet back when we're done with those 4 rows. So now we're finished with our 4 rows of 12 single crochets, and we're ready for our next row. For row number 9, we're going to do a decrease and a single crochet all the way around. We're going to start with a decrease, enter in our stitch marker, then to a single crochet, then we're going to start with a decrease, a single crochet, then a decrease, 2, a single crochet, to a decrease, and to a single crochet. And here we should have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 single crochets. Next, we're going to stuff the inside a little bit. So we're going to get our fiber fill and just stuff the inside. That should be enough. We don't want to overstuff our arms, or they might be too bulky. And for our next row, we're going to do decreases all the way around. So we're going to start with our first decrease. And enter in our stitch marker. Then our our second decrease. And here is our third decrease. And we should end with 3 single crochets on top. For our next row, we're going to pull our yarn and then cut it, but we want to leave enough so that we could sew on the arm and sew the top. Then we're going to remove our stitch marker and get our darning needle and just go through each of the stitches. So we're just going to go up and down. And then pull it together. And then we're going to make this flat. So we're going to put the stitches on the top. Here we have 3 stitches. And then we could keep our yarn tail attached so we could attach it to the body. And here we're going to make 2 of these. To make the legs for the Hello Kitty, we're going to start with a magic circle. And here we're using the silver sparkle because they're going to be her shoes. And then we're going to put 5 single crochets inside. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 single crochets. Then we're going to pull our tail to bring the crochets into a circle. And then we're ready to move on to our next row. For our next row, we're going to do an increase in each of the stitches. We're going to start with our first single crochet. We're going to add our stitch marker. And then we're going to do a single crochet in the same stitch. And that's our increase. And then we're going to continue making an increase in the rest of the stitches. There's our second, our third, our fourth, and our fifth. And here we should have 10 single crochets going all the way around. And then we're going to tighten up our circle. For our next row, we're going to do a single crochet and an increase all the way around. So we're going to start with a single crochet, add in our stitch marker, and then we're going to do an increase. And then a single crochet and an increase. single crochet, and an increase. Single crochet and an increase, a single crochet and an increase. And here we should have a total of 15 single crochets. Next, we're going to do 15 single crochets all the way around. We're going to start with our first single crochet. Add our stitch marker. And continue to make our 15 single crochets all the way around. We'll meet back when we're finished with our row. And here we are on our 15th single crochet, and we've completed the row and we're ready for our next row. And this is her shoe. For our next row, we're going to do a color change. We're going to go into the first stitch, yarn under, pull through, and then instead of yarn overing and pulling through, we're going to take our white yarn, connect it to our hook, pull through the 2 loops, make sure everything is pretty tight. And then we're going to go into the next stitch. Then we're going to yarn under, pull through, yarn over, and pull through the 2 loops, the 2 white loops. And then we have our first white single crochet. And here we could cut our silver off, since we won't be using it anymore, and move it out of the way. And then if you want to, you can get the tail of the white and this silver tail and tie them together, just to make it so it doesn't slip out of the stitch. And then we're going to continue making our single crochets. So here we're going to do our second, third. We're going to continue making these until we have 15 single crochets on the row. And we'll meet back when we're finished. And here we're on our 15th single crochet. And that completes our new row of white single crochets. For the next 6 rows, we're going to do 15 single crochets going all the way around. We're going to start with our first row. And then we're going to add a stitch marker to our first stitch. And for each row, we're going to add a stitch marker. So when we have 6 stitch markers, we're finished with 6 rows of 15 single crochets. And then we'll meet back when we're done with our 6 rows. And here we are with our 6 stitch markers, which means we finished all 6 of our rows, and now we're ready to finish it off. So we're going to pull our yarn. Let's remove all of these stitch markers. then cut it. I'm going to leave some extra so I could use it to sew it on to the kitty's body. I'm going to pull our yarn through, our cord through. Then we're going to take our darning needle and skip a stitch, go through the next stitch, and then down through the inside loop of that first stitch. And then we're going to weave the end through. We'll just go through a few of the stitches. Just find one more. And then we're going to stuff our leg. Let's get some fiber fill and then stuff our leg. And we're going to need 2 of the legs. So here I have one of the legs already sewn on, the Hello Kitty. So I'm going to sew on the other one. So the placement here, if you look at the middle, this is where the magic circle starts. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 rows. So on this 5th row is where we're going to sew the top of the leg. So I'm going to get my knitting needle, it's already into the leg, and I'm going to make sure that it hits that 5th row. So I'm going to put it up one more. So it should be like this. So I'm going to actually start here so that I don't lose the place as I'm sewing it on. So I'm going to turn this around, and we have our darning needle, and then I'm going to go into this stitch. So this is the 5th row here. I'm going to go into the next whole part. And then I'm going to go into the leg. So I'm going to go into the 2 stitches, this stitch and the next stitch. And then I'm going to go into the next 2 stitches on the body. And then here I'm going into the next 2 stitches on the leg. I'm not going into the previous and the next on the legs. So here I'm going into the next stitch, the next 2 on the body, and then in the next 2 on the leg. So here is the next 2, just following the stitches by the leg on the body. And then the next 2 stitches on the leg. then we're towards the back of the leg. So I'm going to go into the next 2 stitches here. And then these 2 stitches on the leg. And then we're going back into the body. I'm going to go through these 2 stitches. And then into the 2 stitches on the leg. And then we're at the middle. So we're going to go into the next 2 stitches on the body. And then through the next 2 stitches on the legs. And here we're at the end. So we're just basically at where we started. So we're going to go into the next 2 stitches on the body. Oops. And then into the next 2 stitches on the leg. And then I'm just going to put the needle through the body and just go out the other side here. Oops, it got stuck around her leg. So through here. Then I'm just going to cut the end off. And then we're done with sewing on her 2 legs. So here the legs are slightly shorter than the skirt, but I think a lot of these dresses are kind of like that, where they drag on the floor. So her dress will drag on the floor too, but you can also add some stitches on the legs to make them longer if you want it to be even with the dress. So here I pinned the arms onto the Hello Kitty so I know where I'm going to sew them on. I'm going to start with this arm first. It's going to start in this row here, right after the stitches, in that little row where you can sew things into it. So I'm going to sew in that row. And here on the arm, this is where we have our cord, and there's really only like 3 stitches going across. So I'm going to start here in the body. I'm going to go into the 2 stitches. So these 2 stitches, and then I'm going to go into the stitch on the arm. And then in the next 2 stitches on the body. And then into the stitch on the arm. Let's see, how can I get in there? So that last stitch there. Make sure it's nice and tight. Then I'm going to go into these last 2 stitches here on the body. And then I'm going to go back into the arm here. And I'm going to go across back to the other side. And then tighten this up. And then I'm going to go into the stitch here, that first stitch, so I can make a knot. So I'm going to go into the first stitch and then go into the loop. So it makes like a knot. And then I'm going to go into the body. So I'm just going to come out from the body. And then cut the yarn, the cord. And then we're done with her first arm. And then I'm going to sew on this arm the same way. Now we're going to work on the fur trim for the bottom of the dress, the arms, and the neck. So for the bottom trim on the skirt, we're going to leave this fur yarn together. It actually comes in 3 different strands put together. So there's 1, 2, and 3, as you can see here, and they're just twisted up together. So we're going to leave all 3 together for the bottom of the dress, and then we're going to take them apart for the sleeves and the neck. So we're going to start with the bottom of the dress. We're going to turn our kitty over and start in the middle seam. For the back of the dress, we're going to start at this back seam. If you can't find the seam, you can just start anywhere towards the middle of the back. So we're going to start here. I'm going to put the hook through one of the stitches, and this hook is actually larger than the one we're using. This one's a 5mm compared to the 3.5 because this is pretty thick. So we're going to put this fur yarn on our hook, and we're going to pull it up through this stitch. And it's a little bit difficult because the yarn is so thick. So once we have it pulled up, we're going to go skip this stitch, go into the next stitch, yarn over, and pull it through that next stitch. Then we're going to yarn over the hook again, and then pull through the 2 loops. So then we have our first crochet. It's really hard to see with this yarn, but you just have to kind of look and to see if the crochet stitches are there. If you don't want to crochet this in, you can probably glue it on the bottom as well, but if you crochet it in, it's going to look a lot fuller. So we're going to skip a stitch, go into the next one, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, and then pull through the 2 loops. So you're kind of just feeling it rather than seeing it. So again, we're going to skip one, go into the next one, yarn over, pull through, then you should have 2 loops, then yarn over and pull through the 2 loops. So then we're going to skip a stitch, go into the next one, yarn over, pull through, and you have 2 loops on the hook, yarn over and pull through. So as you can see, it's becoming pretty full, the fur on the bottom here, and then you can just fluff it out so you can't see any of the stitches. So here we go back into skipping that next stitch, entering the hook, then yarn over, pull through, Then yarn over and pull through the 2 loops. So we're going to continue skipping a stitch, going into the next, and then yarning over and making our single crochet. We'll meet back when we get to the very end. So now we're on our final crochet of our fur trim. Then after skipping one, there's going to be 1 stitch left. So we're just going to go through this final stitch. And then yarn over and pull through, and then we're going to pull the strand up and then cut it. Pull it all the way through, and then here we can just tie the ends in a knot. And then just cut them very close to the ends. And here we're done with the fur trim, and we can just fluff it up. For the trim on the sleeves, we're going to just take one of the strands from our fur. So I'm just going to get a pretty long strand and just take just 1 strand. So then we'll have 2 strands left. So here we have our strand of fur, and we're going to start on the back of Hello Kitty's arm where it turns silver. So I'm going to go through these 2 stitches here. And here I'm using the larger hook again because it just seems to be easier. So I'm going to start with putting the yarn on the hook, pulling through, and then here I'm going to make the slip stitch. And then I'm going to go into the next 2 stitches, yarn over, pull through, have the 2 loops on the hook, yarn over and pull through the 2 loops. Let's try that again. Go into the next 2 stitches, yarn over, pull through. We have the 2 loops, yarn over and pull through the 2 loops. Then we're going to turn the kitty. It's probably easier if the arm isn't attached. So if you don't have your arms attached, I would say don't attach them and just put the trim on first. But we're just going to keep turning the kitty. And then we're going to the next 2 stitches, yarn over, pull through, have the 2 loops, yarn over and pull through the 2 loops. Then in the next 2 stitches, yarn over, pull through, yarn over and pull through. And into the next 2, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through the 2 loops. Oops, try that again. find the loop. Okay. So going back into these 2 stitches, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, and pull through the 2. Through the next 2 stitches, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through the 2 loops. And here we are on our last 2. Yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through the 2 loops. And so here we're finished with our trim around the arm. Then we're going to pull that out. And then here we're just going to tie them together. I'm going to put them in a knot. And then cut it where it blends in. I have to cut it a little bit more. And then we're done with the trim on the sleeve or on the arm. And then we're going to do it on her other arm. So now that we've completed the fur trim on both of the arms, we're ready to make the trim on her skirt. So if you'd like, you can add another row of fur on the skirt, or you can just leave it like this. That's cute too, and just add the stars on. Or you can add another strand of the fur. I'm going to add another strand on the second row where these triple crochets are, and I'm going to place it at the bottom. So I'm going to turn the kitty around, and here I have the yarn, and this is 3 times the amount, and this is 3 times the size of the circumference of this skirt of this row. So we're going to turn the kitty around, and here we have our yarn, the 2 strands, and this is 7 times the size of the area that we're going to make the crochets in. So I'm going to start on the bottom of this triple crochet right in this big stitch. So you can use the 3 strands if you want, but it looks too thick to me, but you could use that. So I'm just using the 2 strands, and we're going to pull through, and then I'm going to do a slip stitch here, and then I'm going to skip 2 stitches and go into the next stitch. That way it's not too thick and crowded, and then make a single crochet. So I'm going to skip 2, then go into the next one and make a single crochet. And if you find it too thick, you can skip more stitches so they're not as bunched up. But I'm just going to skip 2 and then go through the next. You can even go through 2 if you want, but I'm just going to go through the next. And then I'm just going to continue this all the way around, and we'll meet back when we're done with putting the trim on the skirt. And here we're on our last crochet. And I'm going to pull it all the way through. And then this was actually 7 times the amount of the area that I cut to do this, and this is all that's left. So we're going to just tie this in a knot. And then just cut it so it blends in with the rest of the fluffiness. And now we're finished with that second row of fur on the dress. So for the fur on her neck, I'm just going to take 2 strands of the fur and just tie it on, because it's just way too difficult to use this fur into this small space. So just take the fur, and you can use 3 strands if you want, or 4, however many you want, and just tie it in the back. And then I'm just going to cut it to blend in. And then we're done with the fur on the neck. Thank you so much for taking the time out to watch this video. There's a lot going on. And as far as the fur goes, you could just not use that entirely because it is difficult to work with. And without the fur, the Hello Kitty will still look very cute. I hope you found this video useful. If you have, please hit that thumbs up button. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. Also, hit that notification bell so you know when our next tutorial is out. Have a wonderful day.